Yo, what's up guys? It's Reed Young for transformpoker.com. I'm going to be doing a little hand review for you here. I think there's going to be a bunch of different interesting points in this hand. So let's just get into the action and see how it develops. So we get pocket nines in the big blind, and right away we have our first decision point. The button min raises and we're 100 big blinds effective. So a lot of people like to 3-bet here, and I think that's probably the best play, although it can get you into some trouble if your opponent's not 4-betting as a bluff enough pre-flop, given the stack sizes and the small raise. So if you 5-bet shove here, you might actually be running into an exploitive strategy used by your opponent that actually takes advantage of the fact that you're shoving a hand like nines. So what you could actually do is 3-bet as a bluff more pre-flop and take it down, because he won't be 4-betting enough to combat your 3-bet bluffs, and then continuation betting the times that he calls, because they'll probably be calling too wide as well. So you don't necessarily have to be crazy polarized, but you do want to think about what is going to call you if you do 5-bet shove here. So if you 5-bet nines, you're going to need a lot of folding equity on top of it, unless he's 4-bet calling something like pocket eights, which about no one does, or he's 4-bet calling ace-jack suited, and a bunch of combinations where you're racing, which again, no one really does that, especially after min raising, because it's going to go something like $2, $8, $18 a lot of the time. And so you need a bunch of folding equity to break even on a hand like nines. And you guys can figure out the math for that, or we can go over it in a different video if enough people want to say something about it in the comment section. Maybe I'll put together a blog post or something like that for you guys. But anyway, so we actually have a read here that our opponent is folding too often to 3-bets. So we decide to take our nines and kind of slow play them for a number of reasons. So the first being, kind of what we're talking about. Like if we get any action, it's going to be from too strong of a range where we're not going to feel comfortable shoving over the top. And then the other reason is we get a little bit of deceptiveness every once in a while when the board comes favorably for 2 nines. So, the lower the pair, the less likely it's going to be that you're just going to flop an overpair. And something like nines, I mean, it's not looking good. I'm not sure of the exact odds, but I'm sure it's close to like 30% of the time at best that you flop an overpair. Or excuse me, 30% of the time, 70% of the time you do not flop an overpair. So actually we do get lucky here, and you guys have seen that the player who posted this hand check called the flop. So I think given our read and the history that our opponent's been folding to a lot of our 3-bets, that check calling the flop is actually a pretty large mistake. I'm sure it's a profitable play, but I think even more profitably would be to check raise the flop, because we're not going to be able to represent, at least in our opponent's eyes, a credible value range here. So it really looks like we either have the occasional 8-2 or 7-2 suited, which a lot of people don't even play in these positions against a button open, or pocket 2s, pocket 7s, pocket 8s, or 7-8. And then if you compare that with all the straight draws or just check raise bluffs with something like queen jack of diamonds that we might have, our range starts to look pretty weak pretty quickly. So any pair is pretty content calling the flop bet, and probably a lot of turn bets to make a tough river decision. And a lot of 8s, I would imagine, are probably going to look you up on the river expecting to see a straight draw when they do block top pair and top set, and a lot of the value combinations that a check raise seems to represent here. So by check raising pocket nines, we probably get more than our fair share of action, maybe even get rebluffed. So there's a lot of great things that can happen there. If we check call, the board can get kind of weird pretty quickly. I mean, it's pretty tough again for there not to be an overcard, at least on one of the turn or the river. And if we're just playing the check call game, unless our opponent is value betting very thinly, which a lot of people don't do at 1-2, it's going to be tough to be confident in your ability to check call the river. Most turns you're going to be, content check calling, either, pretty happy that you're facing some worse value bets, or it's a card that he's going to be bluffing so often that it just doesn't matter, and you have such a strong hand for, your possible holdings that you do want to call some of the time. So in nines, again, you call it. So we did decide to check call. The turn's a 5, which is a pretty good card for us for a few reasons. The first of which is fairly obvious. I guess we pick up a gut shot to go along with our overpair. Also, if our opponent is the type of player to just say, okay, now I have a 6 in my hand with something like Queen 6, and he's just going to be betting this turn with any 6, any 4, any 9, really any possible straight draw you could have, his turn betting range becomes extremely wide. So a lot of players don't necessarily do that, but I found that at middle and lower stakes that it's fairly common. So great turn in that it is going to widen his betting range. So we can kind of look for that and hopefully take some more knowledge than he expects we have to the river. So the river's a queen. After the turn goes check, check. I think this is a pretty clear value bet. We might not necessarily represent a lot of air. Now that the 5 comes, it does complete a couple of straight draws that we may have. Checking is fine to induce a bluff, but I think, at least in my experience, again, most of what's going to happen is kind of already happened on the turn, and a lot of lower stakes players don't bet check bet as a bluff as often as they should. So when you do get bet into on this river, you're just against a queen a lot of the time, a disproportionate amount of the time, I would say. Whereas in a higher stakes game, people would consider how often they have a queen here, how often they should bluff, what type of raising range they're likely to face, if any, and all of the things that you would need to consider before creating a range for bet check betting on this type of river. So when we check, I think it's kind of a mistake because we're just going to be facing a value bet. If we do check to induce a bet from worse, I don't think it's going to work because we'll just see a queen, and I think anything slightly worse than 9s would have just bet the turn. So I think we should value bet and try to get value from a hand like King 7, where maybe he checks back the turn some of the time with it in order to pick off a thin river value bet from us, or a bluff on some sort of, I guess a thin value bet on a favorable river, or a bluff on a bad river. So this would be a pretty good river. I would expect King 7 to call most of the time if we did bet, and I think you get a lot more value from actually doing the betting yourself than you do by checking, especially given our reads of the typical 1-2 game these days. At least in my opinion. You guys are welcome to comment. Let me know what you think about that, but that's kind of how I see the situation. And so here's where things get really crazy, and I'm just like, whoa, man, what are you doing? So we check raise the river. We don't have any reads, and you guys are welcome to check out the forum. I'm posting a link along with a link to our blog and a couple other cool things in the description below the video. But a link to the thread where we really don't have any reads other than what's going on pre-flop. So to check raise here, you have to know that your opponent is bet folding a lot of Queen X hands, because otherwise you're just better off check calling and trying to induce a bluff. Really the only thing a raise accomplishes or tries to accomplish is to get him to fold a queen. So if you also think about it, some of his queens are going to be Queen 2, Queen 5, maybe even Queen 7, like we said. If he checks back King 7, probably checks back Queen 7. We don't know that for sure, but the point is he can still have some 2 pairs as well, and he's definitely not going to be folding those. So when we check raise here, I don't think it's a great play. Maybe we have to take some of his queens out of his range because they'd bet the turn. I would say certainly hands like Queen 9 and Queen 6 are betting the turn the majority of time for most players. So I don't like the check raise bluff on the river. I think it's really spewy. especially with a hand toward the top of our range where check calling is almost certainly more profitable. If you wanted to check raise bluff here, you're probably better off using something like ace-3 of diamonds if you try to peel the flop and see a diamond turn or an ace turn or a 4 turn, something like that where you're pretty comfortable trying to get to the river, but then the hand played out this way. But, you know, if you check, you have some showdown value. Maybe you win against an unimproved king high or something like that. So checking could be good, and then, you know, you decide if you want to raise or not. But, you know, there's a ton of hands in between ace-3 and pocket nines. So any pair, really, I would say is too loose for check raising here, just depending on how widely you want to check call a flop. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, and you think, you know, maybe you got a little bit better at poker, please consider leaving a like. It helps the channel grow, and it helps spread the word for Transform Poker. Alright, take care, guys.